So, Rachel, in the last segment, you were telling us about the growth of the financial literacy market industry, I guess, if you will. One of the things that strikes me about this, and I should also add that you let us know that the data shows that financial education doesn't really seem to work, but there's a whole group of people out there who continue to push it. Let's talk about why people might be pushing the notion of financial literacy so hard. Obviously, look, I don't think it's a bad idea for people to learn about everything, frankly. But what problem is this trying to solve so that we can get at maybe the heart of it as to why some people are so adamant about solving this problem through I guess, the demand side as opposed to the supply side of the financial business?
Yeah, no, it's the most important question. I think it's obviously a very American ideal. We believe we can teach people, and education is an important sort of mechanism to better our lives. And so people say, well, there are all these problems, so let's teach our way out of it. Let's impart students and people with the skills so that they don't have problems anymore. And I agree with you. I don't think there's anything like inherently wrong with teaching certain concepts in schools. The problem is that it's grown to this point where people say, and you have state legislators and federal lawmakers and state treasurers saying, we're going to teach kids so then when they go out into the world, they're not going to make the wrong choices. And the problem with that is it completely upends what's going on. It's as if people are, buying predatory mortgages and being sold, voracious loans because they're just, uneducated and too stupid, as opposed to, being manipulated and defrauded. And so I think like the leaders of the financial literacy movement are very explicit that they're not just trying to teach things. They want to teach it to meaningfully change behavior and, help people lead more financially secure lives, which sounds good. It's just that there's not a lot of evidence that the way to help people lead financially secure lives is giving them a class in 11th grade on, credit cards. And we may see much more effective ways through other things that could be more politically difficult than passing a state mandate for a required course in K-12.
And before we get to those other things, because I have to say that, the more that we talk about this, it sounds like what we're doing is providing teenagers with these shields that they need for this onslaught that's coming towards them. And obviously what we're not doing is saying, hey, wait a second, we have the ability to impact the onslaught side of this equation too.
Right.
So before we get to that, who are the people that are behind this push? Like your article talks about how many different outfits are providing free courses. Like they must be getting something in return in some way. Let's talk about who these people are and what are they getting in return, or what are they forestalling?
Yes. So there are a lot of people who are interested in this. Obviously, there are people who are interested in it because they truly want to help others and they think education will help, and they're not convinced that the research contradicts their goals in any way. Like my sister is a econ PhD student, and I told her I was working in the story, and she was like, oh, I love that. I support that so much. And I was like, I need to, draw you back a little bit. Like a lot of people are just generally enthusiastic about it because it sounds like it should work. One of the people I interviewed for my story, who was a critic, Helene Olin, who's a journalist, she said, when she started critiquing some of the research, she was like, everyone made me feel like I was hating on apple pie. That's the sort of reaction. So there are some people like that. There's a lot of bipartisan support. Democrats and Republicans both, like how it sounds. But my piece also looked really closely at the fact that some of the most active backers of this movement come from the financial industry itself: banks, insurance companies, credit unions, credit card companies. All of these institutions are seeing a lot of opportunity. And, if you talk to them, they'll say, well, yes, we just want to help. We think education is good. We want to help consumers, et cetera. But at the same time, those same groups are often lobbying against regulation over their industries. And so that's something I looked at in the piece. And in terms of what might be in it for them, there's a lot of advantages to a bank from a bank's perspective. If they sponsor curriculum about how to, buy, budget safely or use credit responsibly, they get, credit. They get sort of the good PR that comes with sort of doing something for the community. They get to put their brand name inside classrooms for teachers, for students, for their parents. There's great marketing opportunities that come with that. And a lot of cash-strapped school districts don't necessarily have the money to afford fancy technology. And so banks are like, oh, well, we'll do it. And then that's also a nice way to get into your classrooms. Not all curriculums are sponsored by banks, and there are foundations and other groups. But one of the things I also looked at is that there are just so many different curriculum providers. No one knows who's using what. No one really knows which is best. Nobody's studying which is best. So it's just this sort of like explosion of options that is growing bigger every year, and it's pretty overwhelming.
So there's two things that occur to me, Rachel, as you're telling me this. One is that these corporations see this as a good bulwark against regulation, right? If they can frame the conversation, like you say, about the problem being the failure of the individual to be able to assess when they're getting ripped off or not, essentially, if that's the problem, as opposed to the fact that we have an entire industry that in many respects as a business model is designed around the idea that we're going to rip people off, or at the very least, we're going to play on their ignorance about these issues. That's one thing, that they get to frame the argument and they get to forestall a certain amount of regulation. But as you're telling me this, the other thing that occurs to me is like, this sounds like Camel Joe, right? Like Bank of America gets to put their financial literacy stuff in the classroom when you're a teenager. You grow up as an adult and you're like, Bank of America, I can trust them. They were helping me as I was a kid. I mean, has there been any research as to does this end up actually hurting people?
I mean, I don't know if there's been research specifically on that aspect, but there has been real, a lot of psychological research on that exact phenomenon of brands that people grow up with are brands that people then trust for life. So yeah, I think it absolutely is a valid concern that if you have Visa or Bank of America in your classroom, as your third grader, you're going to grow up and say, they're out for me. They're like a Disney, a brand that I've known since I was a kid, for sure.
Well, I got to say that you quote Sherrod Brown in your piece, I guess, during maybe what was a banking committee hearing.
Yeah.
And his point is well taken. I'm paraphrasing here, as he basically asked these executives, would we train people to become, medically savvy when they're looking at assessing whether they should get surgery? Would we train people to be able to fix their engine when they're looking to buy a car? I mean, we have a problem where in this country, the car salesmen, the surgeons are basically selling Americans products that they don't need, that are destructive to them. And instead of asking Americans to learn how to assess that, we should step in with professionals and regulate these people. Rachel, it's an amazing piece. I hope people check it out. Thanks so much for your time today.